Hello everyone, Charlie here. I'm a wellbeing coach with Isorropia, and today I am very excited to be bringing to you a slightly different video on the topic of anxiety. But why is this video different? Isorropia is going to be bringing to you, the public, a series of videos geared at taking you on a deeper dive into some of the bigger topics in mental wellbeing. Specifically, over the next few weeks we'll be looking at anxiety, depression, emotional regulation, and confidence and self-esteem, amongst other topics. And this video represents the first in the series. The new content that we'll be releasing will come in two parts. Firstly, I'll release a video just like this one, where I bring to you an overview of the content that we deliver in-house to our members, with the aim of giving you some new ideas and getting those cogs turning. We're not going to stop there though, and with every video we release, we'll be running a live Q&A session that same afternoon. These live sessions will give you the opportunity to bring your thoughts to the table with our crack team of wellbeing coaches on hand to guide the session. If you want to increase your awareness, share some ideas with people who understand, join a positive community, or gain some insight into how you might better manage your mental well-being, then this is going to be the live stream for you. Without further ado though, our first topic in the series, anxiety. So, what is anxiety, and why is it so important that we need to look at it? Anxiety is simply defined as a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease about something with an uncertain outcome. Everybody is going to suffer with anxiety on some level, because inevitably in life we will all encounter times when we're unsure about the future. However, if we're finding that our lives are being governed by this sense of foreboding, then it can be debilitating. Anxiety in its purest form can lead to a whole host of issues, both physical and mental, but the common link that I notice between all people who struggle with this painful emotion is that lasting sense of disconnection. When fear rears its ugly head, it can encourage us to start cutting out the things which really matter to us, like friendships, jobs, hobbies, or meaningful routines. And as our comfort zone shrinks, we can find ourselves feeling completely and utterly alone. So what can push us into this feeling? The truth is that anything can bring about anxiety, from locations to people to situations to thoughts, even to smells. Everybody is going to have unique triggers, and these will vary for each of us depending on the experiences that we've had. We can tell when we're feeling anxious because our body starts to send us a long list of different physical sensations, including, but not limited to, dizziness, headaches, blurred vision, a pounding heart, nausea, stiff legs, sweating, shaking, dry mouth, red cheeks. The list could go on, and none of these are particularly nice feelings. Knowing that fear brings about with it a whole set of unpleasant feelings, we have to ask ourselves, what's the point of it? Why do we have anxiety? On a biological basis, anxiety is closely linked to survival, and it serves to warn us of danger. In the days of hunter-gatherers, anxiety would set those alarm bells off and push us into action if a scary beastie came over the brow of a hill, and would also serve to motivate us to hunt for food when hungry. Where anxiety exists to protect us in times of threat and danger, it makes sense that the feeling overwhelms us, takes control of our mind, and urges us to take one of four responses. These responses, fondly known as the 4Fs, are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight is the response we have when we decide to confront the threat aggressively. This can involve physically battling the threat, but in today's society also includes shouting or being verbally aggressive, amongst other responses. Flight is the response we have when we have the urge to run away. This can be when we flee the situation whilst feeling anxious. Freeze describes the response we have when we feel overwhelmed and immobilized. If we're going into freeze, we might go pale, stop talking, or struggle to focus on what's going on around us. Finally, fawn describes when we buckle or comply with the threat. This response happens when we go along with the threat in order to get through the situation quicker. An example of fawning is when we might be over-apologising, agreeing to things that we don't want to do, or people-pleasing. Sometimes the quickest way to get past a threat is to simply agree with it. Whenever we're feeling anxious, we will find ourselves tending towards one of these responses. It is worth noting though that the way that we respond will heavily depend on the situation that we find ourselves in, and is going to change from person to person. Suddenly, the way that we react when we're fearful starts to make total sense, doesn't it? Our anxiety is like a massive warning siren that is trying to protect us when we think we're in danger, and therefore we'll have one of a few different types of reactions in order to avoid that threat. However, to properly contextualise anxiety and the horrible feelings we get along with it, I'd like to talk to you briefly about the science of what's going on inside our bodies and our heads. The amygdala, otherwise called the fear centre of the brain, is one of the oldest parts of the brain and is right at the centre. We share the amygdala with a lot of other animals, and it is this part of the brain that is directly responsible for giving us our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. I'd like to think of the amygdala as the subconscious meerkat of the brain, always unconsciously vigilant, scanning our surroundings for signs of danger without us knowing it. When the amygdala detects what it thinks is danger, in a matter of milliseconds it sends a signal down to our adrenal glands, at which point adrenaline is released into our bloodstream. A surge of adrenaline serves to give our bodies the additional energy boost needed to potentially run or fight the incoming threat, and is the reason we are able to reach 110% when we need it most. But of course, along with adrenaline, we get so many of the other symptoms of anxiety, like sweaty palms, feeling ill as our blood moves away from our digestion system, a faster heart rate as our heart pumps more oxygen around the body to prepare us for action, and so on. As the amygdala helped with survival, this meant that people with bigger amygdalas survived longer, and so over time natural selection gave us bigger and bigger amygdalas. However, roughly 12,000 years ago, we discovered farming and our society started to change quickly beyond recognition. We started living in protected societies, no longer having to worry about our next meal, where we might sleep, or the scary beasties out there in the night. 12,000 years is not a long time though, and what that means for us is that today we still have these big old fear centres of the brain, quite frankly not enough to be scared of. So, our amygdala is designed to warn and protect us on a primal level from real life dangers. But it doesn't do just that, does it? We as human beings are quite unique and extraordinary. We've developed complexity of emotion and intelligence far beyond that of most other animals, and one of the things which sets us apart is this incredible ability we have to engage in the wonders of abstract thinking. Abstract thinking is the type of thinking which allows us to envisage things which don't exist. It's the reason we were ever able to imagine skyscrapers or space travel, and from this abstract thinking we've been able to accomplish great things. However, abstract thinking is also the reason that we imagine monsters under the bed in the middle of the night. Unfortunately, our brain cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is imagined. To our amygdalas, thinking a thought is just as potent as experiencing the event itself. This means that we have two routes into anxiety: real or psychological. Real anxiety describes the anxiety we feel when there is a threat in the present moment and it is in our vicinity. This type of anxiety is potentially useful as it can help us to manage the situation. If I was being mugged, I'd definitely want anxiety by my side to give me the energy boost to run or fight if need be. On the other hand, psychological anxiety occurs when our thinking is causing us to feel anxious. It happens when we're thinking about the future or anticipating what's going to happen. Sometimes our interpretation of the events in the future can be the issue. The good news is that regardless of our route into anxiety, we can work to manage both. Psychological anxiety isn't something we all naturally start out with, but rather it is something that we can develop over time. As we travel through life, each of us is going to have a set of unique, different experiences. Some of these experiences will be good, like playing football in your back garden, but we'll also have some bad experiences. Those bad experiences serve to communicate really unhelpful lessons that can start to directly affect our beliefs, that is, the way that we see ourselves and the world around us. From these adverse experiences, we can develop a fear of repeated mistakes, and without realizing it, we can start to project our experiences onto the future, skewing our expectations. Our beliefs and expectations about the future act as a springboard for our thinking, and if we've got damaging beliefs, then we'll be generating really unhelpful thoughts. I can't do it. I'm not strong enough. I'll be judged. They won't like me. I won't fit in. As we buy into the stories we're telling ourselves, we can launch ourselves right into that feeling of fear, and you know the rest. We must recognise that it is normal to be scared and to expect the worst if we've already had bad experiences with something. After all, we're programmed with survival in mind. However, we must see that although this has held true for the past, it doesn't necessarily mean we'll be having those same bad experiences going forward. When it comes to tackling our anxieties, it won't be wise for us to try and challenge all of them in one go. Rather, it will be important for us to recognise the different anxieties that we have and to start to prioritise challenging the ones where we want to see the change soonest. When considering which anxiety we want to work with first, it can be helpful to consider how frequently it bothers you. If you find yourself hampered by this anxiety on a daily basis, then this can be a sign that you want to work on that one first. You'll also want to consider the severity with which it affects you. If the anxiety doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it affects you hugely, then again, you may want to prioritise working on this one. Finally, it is worth considering whether the anxiety is actively stopping you from achieving your life goals. So often anxiety will lead to disconnection as we start to actively avoid, and if we're avoiding tasks or situations which help to connect us with our meaning and purpose, then it will be vital that we learn to overcome these fears to achieve self-fulfillment. So often it isn't the situation which causes anxiety, but rather our interpretation of it. That is, our belief or expectation about the outcome of a given situation. Therein lays the power of our thoughts. We must recognise that almost all of our thoughts are subjective. That is to say that 95% of our thoughts are built on assumptions. And there's a saying about assumptions. Almost all thought-induced anxiety comes when we overestimate the threat or underestimate our ability to cope with the threat. Cognitive fusion talks about the state we can find ourselves in when we don't make a distinction between our thoughts and reality, and we don't question our assumptions or interpretations. This happens when we take our thoughts and feelings at face value. We don't always recognise that we need to make a distinction between the brain and the mind. The brain is the judgmental side, constantly casting opinions about you, people, and upcoming situations. This is our inner narrative. However, the mind is the observational part of the brain, and it is responsible for where we put our focus. Although negative thinking is automatic, it is vital that we recognise when we do it and that we also have some degree of control over where we put our full attention and focus and whether we are buying into these unhelpful stories. This means that we must start to notice when we might be telling ourselves unhelpful stories about the reality of a situation and buying into those unhelpful thoughts. There are loads of distorted automatic negative thinking patterns that we can fall into. Some of the ones you may have heard of are black and white thinking, seeing everything in absolutes. Everything we do is either a total success or a total failure. The people in our lives are either all good or all bad. Emotional reasoning, thinking that because we feel a certain way, our interpretation must be true. I feel embarrassed, therefore I must have made an ass of myself. Mind reading, thinking that we know what other people are feeling or thinking. Mental filtering, when we deliberately ignore evidence that would prove our negative thinking wrong, or when we disqualify positives. Catastrophizing, making a mountain out of a molehill and only seeing the worst possible outcome. All these thinking patterns lead to the same destination, anxiety. Is it possible that your thinking, where you put your focus of meaning, is creating your anxiety? If so, how can we go about adopting a more open, positive mindset? By learning to rationalise and reason. Thankfully, the brain is the most adaptable organ in the human body. Cognitive restructuring, or neuroplasticity, is a concept that describes the brain's incredible capacity to physically change and transform by forging new neural pathways and associations. I like to think of the brain as an open field of tall grass. Every thought, every feeling, every sensation that we will ever have is like walking a specific route across this field. We make pathways from one place to another by taking a direction across the field and trampling the grass down. Sometimes the grass is thin, and it's easy to create a path. Sometimes the grass is tall and thick, and we have to work hard to get through it. When we have walked along the same pathway lots of times, it becomes clear and easy to follow. This pathway becomes our natural, instinctual way of thinking. For many of us, that may be our unhelpful thinking styles. What we will be asking each and every one of you to do is to recognise the destructive paths you've been taking and to willfully force yourself to walk a new, more accurate, healthier, positive route. When your brain learns, it makes connections between neurons. When you practice something, you make that pathway through the brain easier to follow. It will seem hard and unnatural at first. After all, you're not used to it. In time though, as you don't revisit the old route, the grass will grow back to cover up the old, leaving you with a new outlook and mindset, a new natural state of being. But how can we work towards forging these new routes? The brain listens to logic, and so we can use logical reasoning to battle our anxiety-inducing thoughts. Some tools which help are thought diaries, a useful tool that provides a format for deconstructing our thoughts, refocusing our attention on the facts, and finding alternative, positive, and more accurate thoughts. We're our own biggest critics, and it can be really helpful to reframe our thoughts by asking ourselves some useful questions to detach ourselves from the situation. For instance, what would my best friend say if they knew I was thinking like this? Or what would I tell a loved one if they were having these thoughts? Replace worry with planning. If all else fails, prepare yourself the best that you can for the upcoming event. This can help to alleviate anxiety no end. Much like we would train in the gym, so too must we train our minds, and in time our mind will strengthen and grow. By practicing switching our mindsets, using thought diaries, reframing our thinking, we can work towards adopting a liberating, open and positive mindset. When we're experiencing the symptoms of anxiety, we can't use logic as the amygdala has hijacked the brain as in full control. We'll need to actively battle the symptoms of anxiety. We can use breathing techniques. 7-11 breathing or diaphragmatic breathing works well. By managing our breathing, we are sending a signal to our body and then to our minds that we are in control and don't need to be feeling anxious. Muscle relaxation. Concentrate on muscle groups individually and aim to relax them. An easy technique for beginners can be to systematically go through each muscle group and clench and unclench. The act of tensing then relaxes the muscles. Visualization. Closing your eyes and thinking back to a really pleasant experience, your safe or happy place. Grounding techniques. Using all of your senses to bring you back to the present moment. So often with anxiety, we're locked into our own minds and time traveling to the future. With grounding techniques, we can re-access the present moment where we'll almost always be safe and secure. Mindfulness, the practice of becoming the observer of your thoughts and feelings and detaching yourself from them without getting intertwined with them. We can also work to reduce the impact of our anxiety by making meaningful changes to our routine and by working towards adopting a healthy and balanced lifestyle. Meditation, what I once considered to be a hippy-dippy concept, is now proven to have so many beneficial impacts in managing not only anxiety, but all forms of uncomfortable feelings. Practicing mindfulness has the literal effect of reducing the size of the amygdala, making physiological changes in the brain. A smaller amygdala means, you guessed it, we'll have a smaller fear response going forward. Exercise, not only a great way to manage pent-up stress, but exercising also actively fights the symptoms of anxiety. Exercise releases all of those important happy chemicals, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and the positive effects of exercise can be felt up to 3 days later. Sleep hygiene. Poor sleep hygiene is proven to increase the likelihood of feeling more anxious. In fact, going a night without sleep is shown to increase your anxiety by an average of 60% the next day. 60%. You don't need to be a mathematician to know that that is an absolutely huge number. But what is the best strategy for challenging our anxiety? The quickest and best way that we can work towards challenging our anxiety is one that's going to make us feel wholly uncomfortable. I'm talking about exposure in a safe and measured way. We'll need to feel the fear and do it anyway. Exposure to our fears works to combat both types of fear, real and psychological. By pushing our comfort zones, we will start the process of reteaching ourselves that things aren't as bad as they seem. We will undo those unhelpful stories of the past, and challenging our fears head-on will have the literal effect of rewiring our neural pathways, starting that cognitive restructuring process. Moreover, as we shed the confines of our old comfort zones, we will start to reconnect with that which gives us meaning and value, and this will have a huge positive knock-on effect to so many other areas of our mental well-being. Remember, our previous hardships have played a big role in shaping our perspectives of the world, and it will be down to us to give ourselves more positive experiences going forward. When it comes to exposure, there are 2 types, flooding and gradual. Flooding is exactly what it sounds like. It's when we jump in straight at the deep end and throw ourselves straight into the situation. This is shown to have the quickest results, but can seem like a big step to take. On the other hand, gradual exposure gives us a more gentle approach to challenging our fears and asks us to take small steps and gently confront our fears in bigger and bigger ways. Both of these strategies work wonders, but I do have to mention them with a warning. Do not leave the situation if you're still feeling anxious. If you leave the situation while you're still anxious, you'll only reinforce your anxiety, making it harder for you in the long run. Knowing that the best way to fight your anxiety is through exposure is by its very definition terrifying. After all, we're encouraging you to face your fears head on. There are a few things that you can do and remember to make it easier. 1. Act despite your anxiety. Know that it's going to get easier in time with the benefits being felt very shortly after the event. 2. Take it one day at a time. Break down the scenario into small, achievable chunks. By continually making small efforts, you'll eventually achieve the ultimate goal. 3. Focus on the positive. Practice switching your mindset and challenging those thoughts. Remind yourself of the long-term benefits of battling your anxiety. And 4. Let the pursuit of happiness be your motivation. Remember that contentment and comfort in your life is your end goal, and stay focused on the why you're pushing yourself. Remember, nothing great was ever achieved from a comfort zone. Hopefully this video has given you a little insight into the origins of your anxiety and has given you some ideas for how you might start better managing going forward. Don't forget to join us this afternoon for the live discussion where we will be bringing you additional content and you will have the chance to bounce some great ideas around with our team of wellbeing coaches. Until then, take care, peace.